Hey, eyes and shine, my friends and colleagues, and welcome to the I Give a Damn podcast, brought to you by Fluorescene Media, the same company behind Odie's on Facebook. I'm your host, Dr. Joseph Allen, and today's episode, we get to hear from Dr. Jessilin Quint and how she was able to build a dry eye clinic from the ground up. From identifying unmet patient needs to mastering diagnostics, marketing, and patient education, she helps us unravel what it takes to build a clinic that thrives in this specialty. I think whether you're a practitioner who just wants to start dabbling a little bit more in dry eye, or you aspire to maybe start your own dry eye clinic or spa, then this is definitely an episode to lean into. So without further ado, let's hit it and hear from Dr. Jessilin Quint. Before we dive into the episode, I do want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, MacuHealth. If you've been following my content, then you know how deeply passionate I am about ocular health, as well as improving and protecting the eyesight of our patients in the clinic. MacuHealth is known for their triple carotenoid formula, lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin. And whether you're concerned about age-related macular degeneration or just want to help your patients with the nutrients they need to stay sharp, MacuHealth has you covered. We'll talk about MacuHealth again a little bit later in the episode, but otherwise, let's get going. Jessilin, thank you so much for being here. So can you start off just by, for all of our viewers, listeners, tell us who you are, where you work, where you practice, and what do you do?
Well, thank you for having me. It's such an honor. Well, I'm Jessilin Quint. I'm an optometrist. I practice in the beautiful state of Maine. I co-own a private practice there called Smart Eye Care. We have 3 primary eye care locations, and one of my passions is definitely dry eye. So we have a kind of a whole dry eye clinic that's kind of dedicated to that. Practice ownership, fun, right? Lots of ups and downs for sure, but I love what I do. I love my patients. I love my team. I feel like every day it's an honor and a real privilege to get to do what I do. But that's me.
Now, I know you do a lot of different things, not only for your own practice, but within the industry. You speak on a lot of different topics. But I would love to know what inspired you to start a dry eye practice?
Yeah, lots of different hats for sure. But dry eye specifically, it started a little bit because I was a patient that had dry eye. And so a little bit almost out of like selfish reasons, I was really just like trying to read everything and wanted to know like what options I had to just kind of help myself. I knew the quality of life impact that it had on me. So that's almost originally where it started. But then when I started kind of reading up on it and started thinking about, well, like how many of my patients probably have dry eye and how many times have I missed that? And I wasn't proactive enough to really kind of hit this dry eye condition head on to really help impact their quality of life or, you know, their vision capacity or whatnot. So then it snowballed from there. But then also being a business owner, like I think about the one thing that's impacted my private practice alone is actually dry eye, right? So if you're missing that, then a patient's not going to value that like really high-end glasses sale. They're not going to feel like their contact lenses are good enough, even though if they're in a really good lens, right? Or that patient retention coming back year after year. So then I started to kind of see like that, just how much that impacted, which put more of a need of we've really got to look at this. We've got to not only for just the patient experience and just taking care of the patient, but even from just trying to have a profitable practice, right? You have to have, if you're having a practice, you have to be able to, you know, keep the lights on and whatnot. And so dry eye disease is just something you just definitely don't want to miss. But dry eye is an exciting time, right? We have so much innovation, so many new things that have come out. I feel like I became really passionate about dry eye, like about 8 years ago. Before that, like I was a patient starting to do research, but about 8 years ago is when I started to really like deep dive into patients and like, how can I be more proactive to catch this ahead of time before they start having a lot of different symptoms. And so it's really cool to just see, even in a short 8 years, like how much dry eye has really changed within our industry.
It is something fascinating I've been paying attention to, like new devices, new treatments, new medications, just new even thoughts as new publications are coming out with lifestyle, and there's over-the-counter options, lots of different things. I'm curious from a business standpoint, from a practice owner, how did you initiate that change? How did you decide, hey, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm getting really passionate about this. I see this value I can bring to patients and improve your care. But how do you make that decision? How do you get the gears to start shifting? Okay, how are we going to schedule this? Did you open up a separate spa for it? Can you give us a little bit more details?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an overnight decision, right? Like we decided something and then the next day it kind of changed. This was really kind of more of a buildup. So when I first started just getting into dry eye and treating it, it was, within my primary eye care setting, right? Like patients would come in for a comprehensive eye exam. They might have symptoms for it that we'd address, or they might not, but they had all these clinical signs. And so from there, then I made kind of my next step was like, well, I need to make a conscious decision. Tackling dry eye at the same time of a comprehensive eye exam isn't just the most appropriate use of time, or even, like insurance, that component of it. So the first step was just started to bring those patients back that either had the clinical signs or had all the symptoms to kind of do just like a dry eye eval, right? And just kind of booked it as like an office visit or kind of a follow-up slot. And there I kind of started a deep dive in. And just by doing that, that really built this kind of whole dry eye patient base. But then sooner, dry oftentimes has more follow-up visits, like periodically, because you're checking on the progress. You might prescribe a medication or, something like that. And then that started to lead to where there just weren't enough exam slots, within a primary eye care schedule. So then that started to create a little bit of an issue. But then at that time, IPL, right, was on the market. And so we started to have kind of these dry eye treatments that you could bring in-house, Blefex, Zest, and whatnot. And so then it was like, okay, these are great services, but where do they fit kind of in this primary eye care schedule, right? You're a doc, you can't do like 90 million things within that hour, within that exam. And so just that load alone kind of led to, well, like, what if we kind of create like a separate space for a dry eye clinic? And then there for a little bit, that led into a little bit, of kind of that aesthetics component. At one time we had an esthetician, we had a nurse that would kind of do, some of those things that are maybe outside my scope, but would kind of be able to extend those services to the patients. And then from there, then that kind of built to like a referral center. And then from there, it kind of built to like where we could do some like different research things. So it's been like this step-by-step thing that's really snowballed. But when I look back to where we started, I mean, it just started with like my comprehensive eye exams, essentially.
So eventually you decided, hey, okay, we need to step up the game in dry eye. Did you immediately bring on new equipment? Did you bring on diagnostics, imaging?
Yeah, it's been also a step-by-step process. So when we first started, while I was still kind of in that comprehensive eye exam space, but doing dry eye, the next thing we brought in was a meibography unit, right? So we could started kind of doing imaging just almost on every comprehensive exam. Pictures worth 1,000 words. That led to more kind of a dry eye patient. Then that led to us getting like a device for thermal pulsation. And then that led to us purchasing a tear osmolarity unit for diagnostic. And then that led to us purchasing our first IPL device back in like 2018, I think. And then from there, it's just kind of snowballed from there. So it's sometimes these diagnostic equipment can be really expensive at times, right? And so I think just kind of doing it step by step for that, at least for our practice, made that business decision and just that finance piece a little bit easier to kind of jump into. Now, we have a space for it we have like the Oculus, right, that does like all the diagnostic videos and whatnot, and the printouts with the crystal report for our patients. And so now I feel like we have kind of all the bells and whistles, but that definitely was like a slow kind of process to that. And I look back and I kind of like that we did it that way, in the sense that we could get like our staff really comfortable with it. There wasn't this huge financial pressure that we just took out like hundreds of thousands of dollars on loan, right, to just try to kind of turn that into the profit. We could kind of get comfortable with that treatment, kind of once within a couple months of that was paid for, kind of move on to the next step of that. So it's definitely been a step-by-step process, definitely not like an overnight kind of happening here.
An overnight overhaul sort of thing. I know, I imagine communication, even within the business, right? Yourself, staff, being able to better learn how to communicate the value, really what's going on with dry eye probably plays a role in that. Can you share just thoughts and stories of like what has really helped you with that communication, whether it be directly to the patient or just within the clinic, getting everybody on board about a new treatment, a new diagnostic? Can you talk to that?
I think there's definitely two types of communication that are important. First is that internal communication component. And everybody in your office, every member on your team should know what dry eye services you offer. You never want a patient to, like Google IPL, right? Your website pops up in their area. They call your office and you're like, hi, I'd like to schedule an IPL services. And your staff person's like, what's IPL, right? So like you never want that experience. So even at least just getting everybody on the board so that they know what it's like. I also like to train my staff to be able to kind of answer those common questions. Like what can a patient expect, right? When they come in for their, that first IPL kind of treatment. But I think the biggest kicker is have your staff be the patient so that they can see and experience kind of that dry eye treatment firsthand, because just having that firsthand experience, just naturally, you just have more awareness of it. You can ask those questions. They might be able to give some positive feedback about the experience that they had. So that's kind of a big kind of push, is making sure everybody has tried the treatment or at least seen it and demonstrated it if they didn't want it done on themselves. And then anytime we bring something in, I've also found like a big tip for communicating change. And even though sometimes change can be really good, like adding a new piece of equipment, it's still a change. It might change how you work your office flow, how you do your pitch to kind of a dry eye patient. You got to communicate the why, right? So like that's the biggest thing. It's not just like, we're going to start doing, LipiFlow now. It's like, we're going to start doing LipiFlow now because, right? And then kind of add the why of why it's going to benefit our patients and how we're going to fit it into our schedule and how awesome this could be and what challenges we might have to learn along the way. So that's been really huge. I would say another tip is if you're onboarding something is I always like to kind of front stack like my patient base. Like before the piece of equipment arrives in my office, I have a list of a lot of patients that I think would be a good candidate for that. But not necessarily to just like, maybe get some, money coming in for that piece of equipment, but really because in a short amount of time, you and your staff have a lot of direct experience of how to kind of do that treatment, right? Or the flow or some pitfalls that might pop up or common patient questions. And so doing that in a short amount of time really just helps kind of navigate some of those like things that need to be smoothed out a little bit more.
Yeah.
So that's been good.
I can sort of see that as like a jump start in a way, because I think I've heard and I've seen this happen where clinics will bring on a new piece of equipment and it's a slow start to get like everything ironed out. No one wants to be in that uncomfortable situation where they're stumbling over their words or they're not sure how to really present it. And then it just collects dust.
Yep, exactly, which is what you don't want.
What is because you're running a primary care clinic primarily, and then you have the dry eye specialty component.
Correct, yeah.
And so how do you balance those two? I want to take a quick break just to remind you about today's sponsor, MacuHealth. If you are listening to this, then you probably care about eye health just as much as I do. MacuHealth offers a line of incredible supplements that's formulated around published science. MacuHealth is known for featuring the three most important carotenoids for your macula: lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin. Whether you're managing age-related macular degeneration or simply looking to offer your patients a high-quality supplement you can trust, MacuHealth has your back. Now, back to the episode.
Well, I don't know if balance is the right word, because the reality is I think it's sometimes just like a juggling act at times. I think that there's enough of a need there that like we need another doc, right, to kind of help either offset the primary eye care piece or the dry eye kind of piece, because we're getting to where we're full on both ends and I can only, do so much. But being in that position and, I'm located in Maine, so sometimes it's just harder to recruit a doc in general. It's not like I can, like next week probably hire someone. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a process and you want them to be a good fit too. And obviously if we're doing dry eye, they have to be kind of have an interest in that essentially. But in those times where I'm kind of balancing kind of both of those, that's where like I really rely on my team and having them have being well trained to be able to delegate the things that they can do, scheduling patients, staying on top of it, doing some of these treatments, right? Like the team dynamic is really what makes it be able to happen and be able to function. So it's definitely kind of an interesting dynamic because while they're similar, they are sometimes two kind of totally different entities in your thought process behind them. And even just like the kind of the curated experience approach is a little bit different. And so sometimes it is a little bit of like a mind game of switching between those. So right now I have like 2 to 3 days, depending on the week, kind of that are focused more on dry eye. And then the other days that are more primary care. Sometimes that's tricky because if you only have dry eye days on like a Wednesday or Thursday, but your patient is, working on those days and needs dry eye treatments on, Monday, Tuesday, Friday, then, sometimes we make exceptions to that. Hopefully I'll get to a point to where we have 5 days of both and it's totally stocked with ODs and it's just kind of up and running, but growing pains, right? Hopefully like in 6 months, I'll be at a different spot and probably have a different answer.
I think that's just an adventure of running a practice, owning a business, trying to figure out what's best for not only what functions for the business, but also what really adds value to the patient, how you can best serve them. Even being a leader in like a dry eye business space, someone who's done it on your own, right? Which type of, because we have so many different procedures, we have different therapeutics, we have different ways to manage dry eye now. But in your experience, both as a clinician, but also as a business owner, what have you seen the best value for your patients and the overall, like what type of treatments do you think are kind of your favorite?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools there, right? There are so many different options. And I think, even if somebody doesn't have access to like the thermal pulsation and in-office treatments and IPL and radio frequency, if you can still have a dry eye practice right now with just prescribing medications, right? Like there's so many new options and there's obviously at-home therapy and nutraceuticals, to kind of complement that. So you can certainly build, I feel like a dry eye kind of patient-based and dry eye practice on even that alone. And obviously that snowballs. I think to answer your question, it depends on what your patient demographic is. So I would say from a diagnostic perspective, some sort of imaging, because sometimes patients might not see the impact until they see it. So whether that's an anterior side camera, something like a myographer, a cell phone that you take kind of a picture of, I just think you need some sort of an imaging device really for the standpoint of patient education. That's been really huge for like patient buy-in. From a treatment standpoint, so my patient demographic in Maine is largely Caucasian who have a lot of rosacea. So when I think about an in-office treatment that's had a lot of bang for the buck, IPL is that. But I don't think that would be my same answer if I had a different patient demographic. And I really, IPL is very sexy right now, right? Like it's everything, people talk about. And usually that's like the first piece of equipment that people want to buy. But not every patient needs IPL. Not every dry eye patient needs IPL. So I think it's just getting clearer on, what your patient demographic is. It's the same as, within business, right? Like who are your clients? Who are you trying to serve? What is your goal? It's kind of the same thing in dry eye. I have a large rosacea patient base. So that's been, really helpful.
I think it also, specifically with that type of treatment and other similar treatments, you're tackling two components of not only the dry eye symptoms and helping with inflammation there, but there's also a cosmetic side. And in my adventures looking into things like the world of social media and what people really attach onto, vanity and how we appear in our society puts a lot of weight on how we appear. Mm-hmm. And our eyes are such an intimate part, right? When you're having a conversation, you look into someone's eyes and how they show up. And if they're red, swollen, look irritated, maybe, there's suspicion, maybe an employer maybe has a suspicion that maybe they're smoking something, because their eyes are red all the time.
Yeah.
If there's some way we can help them not only feel better, but let's get your eyes, the ocular area looking better, healthier.
Yeah. People want to look good, right? And especially with eyes, like that's the first thing people notice usually. So having that kind of aesthetic overlay really does kind of peak up, their interest a little bit. And I never lead with like, we're not doing an IPL for purely aesthetic reasons. I lead with a dry purpose, but kind of a common thing that we could, affect as not really a side effect, right? But like a secondary impact are possibly some of these aesthetic things. And usually once you say that component, then there's like definitely more of that buy-in. But it's really interesting because even just having that little bit of an overlap naturally often leads to a bigger discussion about like what ingredients could be impacting that, right? Or what does my sleep look like? Or what does my nutrition look like? Or what are my stress levels? So I think by just even having something that kind of touches on the aesthetic part just has really interestingly naturally led to this other discussion about these other things that can impact dry eye that like 10 years ago we weren't necessarily having those discussions regularly with patients.
I know when I first came out of, actually, I'll just say even school, like a decade ago, I think an easy entry point into anything ocular surface disease, anterior, whether it be something like blepharitis to dry eye, were a lot of at-home, over-the-counter products. I'm curious of your thoughts and experience. What do you guys offer? Do you sell out of your clinic any specific, warm compresses or nutraceuticals of any kind?
Yeah, so we, all of those, I always kind of talk about, they're almost more kind of maintenance kind of, or more preventative. If somebody really is kind of in that, moderate to severe stage of dry, any at-home thing, even if it's really good, is not going to solve their problems. So my stance on that has always been like, yes, we're going to do these for prevention and for maintenance, but it might not get us to where we need to be. But sometimes, like if on a comprehensive exam, if they're really symptomatic, I might start them on some of these at-home therapies and then, bring them back for a more in-depth dry eye consult. And then from there, we talk about prescriptions or in-office treatments or whatnot. I think we're just kind of on the brink of really being open to how much nutrition and gut health and all of that really plays a role, especially in dry eye. Dry eye is inflammatory, right? And we know about those impacts of it. So I do recommend, we don't sell a vitamin in office, but I have two that I really specifically recommend. And so I have it printed on, I usually with dry eye patients have like a sheet with recommendations, but I put the picture of the product so that if they don't buy it in my office, they know exactly what it looks like. And I kind of give them a description and then the why of why I feel like we need to do this. But I do have other kind of at-home therapies. So we, carry a number of different like lid hygienes. We have the makeup line. We have sunscreen. We have hot compresses, the little eye seals, kind of moisture goggles. So there's a number of those that we sell in the office. And my stance on that is that I feel like I've vetted products, right? Like we all kind of have our different ones, but there are products that if I'm recommending it, it's because I've like vetted it. And I genuinely believe that recommendation is going to be best for this patient given, whatever is happening in their life. And so I don't want my patient to leave the office, be standing on this giant aisle and then just get overwhelmed by like the number of options and then decisions and then pick something that I didn't recommend that either doesn't get us ahead or sets us back. So I want them to get exactly what I want and I want it to be convenient, right? We all know that with compliance, convenience is key. So if I recommend things and then my patients have to go to like 9 different websites to order this or 10 different stores, they're not going to get that or in a timely manner. And then that's going to impact our dry eye goals and our treatment plan.
I think for myself, I struggle with decision fatigue. And that, I think definitely doctors, we feel this a lot. Business owners, even more probably. But our patients are too. Like they have busy days. They've got a lot of things to manage. And if I can eliminate them having to go to a store, which store do they go to? Go to a website and then see 30 different products that all have different colors and different marketing. It's like, no, let me help you out. Let me help you make this decision. I've already done this work for you. Make it simple. And I think you're actually doing a great service by doing that.
I think so too. It's kind of saving them time, right? And then you try it. And then if that isn't serving them or isn't aligning, then you can kind of pivot from there, right? Nobody is identical. And so some bodies are going to respond differently. So I think as a practitioner, yes, make it convenient and make it easy, but also have a couple of different options, right? Have your leader contender. But if it's genuinely not working for the patient, then, have a backup plan, have kind of your second option that you could look to.
Now, there's so much in the dry eye space, right? We could talk for hours on this. That's why there's so much lectures and there's so many different articles being written about dry eye and the pathophysiology, new discoveries we're having. Right now, I'm curious of your passions in the realm of ocular surface disease and dry eye. Is there any new therapies, new treatments, or just new publications, things that have broadened your insights into how you can better manage your patients?
Yeah, there's been a few research studies on kind of that sleep and stress impact on dry eye, but there's not very many. And so I am very interested and very intrigued by that part of it. And so I want to know more about like how directly, that impacts it. But I like just being able to have new innovations that have different mechanisms of actions that just allow me to kind of treat things a little bit differently. Even in the pipeline, there's a lot of cool things for blepharitis, for, treating dry eye on the cornea, right? Impacting the meibomian gland. So I think I don't know if it's necessarily one thing that's just like blowing my socks off right now. I think I'm more just really impressed that we have more tools because every patient's different. It's not a one size fits all. And sometimes on these dry eye patients, you need different tools in order to do that. I also like that there's been a lot more awareness, as you talked about, like it's hard to not go to any conference and not have like some dry eye lectures on the radar. But there's been a lot of awareness about dry eye masqueraders, essentially, because there are a lot of things that can look like dry eye that in fact are not dry eye, right? Like neuro dry eye, NK, rosacea at its core. Like there's so many different EBMD. And so just, I think having more awareness that it's not always dry eye, right? It could kind of be these other components, I think makes us really put on our like clinical kind of decision maker hat and kind of walk through those steps to make sure we're getting the right diagnosis. I feel like with dry eye, when you're just getting started, like on one hand, we want to make it simple because we just want docs to be doing it, right? Like let's just make it simple. Just, treat the lid, tackle the cornea inflammation, work on the meibomian glands, right? Like 3 steps. But when you get into the thick of it, a lot of times it's not as simple. So I like the simple approach and the fact that it just brings more awareness and gets more docs to be proactive about it. But you're exactly right. It's just dry eye can be really complicated. But that's kind of why this day and age is so exciting because we have more tools. We're constantly learning things. I love that there's so much research around this because it's kind of one of those things that like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And there's just so much that we don't know. It's really fascinating. I sat in a kind of a discussion earlier about like just corneal receptors, right? Mm-hmm. And I had never really thought about the number of corneal receptors that are on the front part of the eye. Like some detect cold, vibration, temperature changes, right? But even just within that, there's like so much that we just still don't know essentially, right? So I think it's going to be really cool in the next 10 years to just see, like we'll probably look back on this time and be like, man, it's really evolved.
Right. And then of course you could dive into how AI is changing things, how we're interpreting research. Who knows what's going to happen? It's exciting and a little scary at times. Let me ask you, switching conversation just a little bit. Again, you're a business owner. For other business owners out there, can you share any insights, great lessons you've learned in your journey of owning a practice, running a practice? Is there anything on top of mind if there was either a young doc or maybe somebody who's just decided, you know what, I'm going to go on this venture on my own? What kind of lessons, recommendations that you would have?
Yeah, do it. Because you just have to there's never the right time. There's never that perfect opportunity. You just kind of have to rip the Band-Aid off and jump in with full faith. So several lessons learned along the way. I mean, I look back and I'm like, man, there's just, you live and you learn, right? And sometimes you don't always know the best answer. And so you just have to make a decision because sometimes making a decision is better than just being really indecisive. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you realize, would have probably have handled that a little bit differently. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it is a big lesson that I've learned, and it's that explain the why. An example recently, within the last year, we decided to drop one of our vision plans, which is a really big one, and a lot of people in our area took this vision plan, but it didn't quite align with what we wanted as a business and what we felt like our reimbursement was worth, right? So it just didn't serve us, and so we dropped it. So we have 3 locations, and at 2 of our locations, the rollout went really, really well. And at 1 location, it wasn't so great. It wasn't so well received. There was a little bit of kind of staff pushback on, I don't think that's the best decision. This is really going to hurt us. And I look back on that alone, and I'm like, why did that go so well in 2 of our locations and not the 3rd? And it kind of goes back to that why. In 2 of those 3 locations, we explained the why of why we made this decision. The backstory, all the business, like all those kind of little ins and outs that you wouldn't necessarily normally talk about with maybe staff on a day-to-day. And at the other location, we just kind of said we were doing this. This is the date that it's happening. This is what's going to happen afterwards. And we didn't really take the time to kind of nuance the why of that. And that was just like kind of that's happened several times, I feel like, along my, my practice owner journey. But that was like a recent example of like, yep, explaining the why is really important. But I also think navigating through change, right? Being a business owner, you're constantly pivoting, essentially. Change is just part of it. And so I think you just have to get really comfortable with that. If you can develop a skill set of leading a team through change, that like even ups the ante a little bit. But sometimes you don't know until you kind of go through that experience. And there's so many resources out there, books, podcasts, right, that can kind of help you develop that skill set. But just being open to change, just being open-minded, realizing that things are working for us now, but we have to keep, being innovative. We have to keep growing. We have to keep learning in order to kind of stay in the game, essentially. And I think that's a real lesson, because you work so hard, right, as a business owner, and especially if you're a doc too. You have this one hat that you're exhausted from patient care, and then at the end of the day, you're doing all your practice ownership. And so sometimes it's really hard to think outside the box, but it's important to also take time to have time to think creatively. I think what's really helped me as a practice owner, as silly as it sounds, is being on a plane. So I've had the opportunity to be a KOL, or to be a speaker, or to kind of go to different conferences and kind of have a different kind of set of professional endeavors with that. But in doing so, it's put me on a plane where I have a lot of quiet time, right? I'm not distracted by a phone. I don't have anybody chit-chatting. I don't have like, I need to do the laundry, or I need to finish this, article. It's just kind of this uninterrupted time. And I found that for me personally, like that creative time allows me to just reflect, like what is my business doing well? What am I not doing well? And so I think the lesson in that is, just take time to be able to reflect, I think, as a business owner.
Can you share a story of maybe the most challenging, or a time where you were really challenged as a business owner, and how you eventually found your way through it?
Yeah, there's been several. I would say a big one is, so the practice that I'm at now, I did not start cold. I bought it from a doc that was kind of on the brink of retirement, essentially. And that was really hard for like a solid couple years, because kind of how I wanted to grow the business was different than how the previous owner had wanted to grow the business. He was still in the practice, and there was still a little bit of kind of his office culture, right, and his dynamic there. And you had to kind of weed through that. And eventually it kind of led to like that first year, we almost kind of had to clean house essentially with staff, like just to like, this is where we're going. This is what we want to do. If you don't want to do that, then you need to find a practice that fits you better, right? That was a really hard year. It was stressful. It was emotionally hard. It was not fun. It was really hard. People just kind of question, because you're like the new kid on the block essentially. And so there's just a lot of dynamics that kind of that go with that. But I feel like looking back, what I'm glad I did is being confident in who I am and knowing that it will be okay. I just got to get through this, being persistent, and then just trusting your gut, right? Just kind of going back to like those basic instincts. But that was a really hard time, essentially. So, but as a business, there's been really great times, like really, really big wins, really big, exciting times. But it's also been, challenging. COVID, right, was like a big pivot, and that was hard.
So kind of winding down the episode, we kind of have a tradition with the final question, and it's really just to highlight what you give a damn about, because clearly you're focused on practice ownership. Dry eye has been a focus of yours, but you have many things that you give lectures on a lot of different topics. But if you were, let's say, nominated and put into the position of being the Surgeon General of optometry. You are going to be the head of optometry for, let's say, the United States government. What big change in eye care, the field of optometry, public health, what do you think would be, if you had to pick one thing to focus on, that you wish you could see changed for the better?
I don't know if I would necessarily say I wish I saw it changed, because I do think it is happening, but it would be education. I give a damn about education. I want my patients to be educated. I want my staff to be educated. But I think why I love lecturing so much is I just love sharing tips and tricks to colleagues, right? I think we all learn and grow when we just have more knowledge. And so for me, if I was like the Surgeon General of eye care, I would probably find ways and resources to just make sure that was enriched, right? Or that we were educating to kind of the fullest extent. So I'd probably say education.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Clearly, you have a wealth of information and so much experience to share. And thank you so much for just sharing your knowledge and helping us all grow in our own path.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for giving a damn.
So that there was our episode for today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you found something really insightful in today's episode, please, I encourage you to leave us a comment or review over either on YouTube if you're watching us there, or if you are just listening to us on your favorite podcasting platform. I really do take all of your thoughts, considerations, and comments to heart, so please drop those over there. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you and hearing from you in the next episode.